My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
The Red Apple Media Podcast Network presents This is Protecting America. Now, here's Emmy-winning journalist Rita Cosby.
Welcome to another edition of Protecting America. Well, some eye-opening details about the Biden White House are coming out in a bombshell new book, and many of the details relate to then President Biden's mental fitness and what was really going on behind the scenes. And joining us now to discuss his big new book is Jonathan Allen. He is an award-winning journalist, New York Times bestselling author who covers national politics for NBC News, and also his awesome new book, everybody. And I encourage all of you to get it because it is fantastic. It is called Fight: Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. And boy, was it wild. Jonathan Allen, really great to have you here.
It's such a pleasure, Rita. I'm a big fan of yours and have been for a long time, so this is kind of a thrill for me.
Well, right back at you. You do terrific work. And John, this really was a blockbuster book. You covered so many different layers. You interviewed so many folks. I know of your great reputation. What was the biggest surprise for you, or some of the biggest surprises for you, that you uncovered of what was really going on in the Biden White House?
So there were a few things. I mean, number one, just how early some of the people that saw him face to face understood that there was a real problem. And I mean, certainly the folks closest to him in the White House, many of them still haven't spoken, but even that next layer, we have an anecdote in the book about Congressman Eric Swalwell from California, who I think a lot of people are probably familiar with. Certainly Joe Biden should have been familiar with him because Eric Swalwell ran against Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination, one of the many candidates in 2020. And Swalwell had also been an impeachment manager against Donald Trump in Congress. And Swalwell went to a congressional picnic at the White House in the summer of 2023, so a year before Trump's debate with Biden. And Swalwell started talking to Biden and realized that the president didn't recognize him, didn't know who he was. And Swalwell sort of had to cue Biden as to who he was, to remind him of their relationship and the fact that they knew each other. There was a fundraiser that Biden went to around the same time in New York at a very nice restaurant with a small group of donors, and Biden just froze in the middle of speaking. Sort of the way it was described to us is very much like folks had seen with Senator Mitch McConnell in recent years, where he's had these episodes of freezing. And one of the participants in that dinner, came away wondering whether Biden would live through the next election, much less be on the ticket. There are some stories we've got about Kevin McCarthy kind of having to, visiting the White House with the family of a former or a late Congresswoman, Jackie Walorski, and Biden giving this tour. And his tour was, instead of the big important things at the White House, he walked this family out to the locker rooms by the pool at the White House and was really interested in showing them the locker rooms. And Kevin McCarthy thought to himself, man, this guy's really lost it. So there are, any number of stories in this book about what was going on at the Biden White House. And I think, some of that level of detail was surprising to us. I think everybody could watch that the president was declining from a distance, but the hard thing for reporters in real time is twofold. Number one, the White House kept Biden away from reporters, and two, we're not doctors. So when you're writing a news story, you can't make a diagnosis of a patient you haven't seen, particularly when you don't have a medical degree.
You bring up so many questions, too. Some of the other stories, too, that you had in your book here, Fight, John Allen, was the sort of the tape, right? That there was like a tape marker that he really didn't know where he was walking so much of the time, that it was so basic. I think it was at some event he had to have some bright colored tape so he knew which way to go.
That's right, Rita. He went to a fundraiser at Governor Phil Murphy's house. This is actually a couple days after the debate with Trump, but it seemed that it was common practice by that point that his aides laid down fluorescent tape, little strips of fluorescent tape, like breadcrumbs, to show him where to walk. And we're not talking about some lengthy maze he had to go through. He was at a house for a fundraiser, and when he followed that tape, he went out to the patio to meet with a group of maybe 40 or 50 donors, and he had a lectern set up, and he had teleprompters, which is very odd for a politician at a small fundraiser. Those are supposed to be intimate gatherings. It's kind of politics 101 for a president to just go schmooze with the donors, tell them he's happy that they're there and it's nice to see them and what he's running on. And he needed a teleprompter for that. The accommodations that the White House staff were making for him toward the end of his candidacy and even months before that were the kind of things that would have made most of us pause and say, wait, if we're having to do this for the leader of the free world, there's a problem.
You brought up Eric Swalwell, the congressman from California. Just so people know, he's a very notable congressman. He's someone who Joe Biden knew well. He was a high-profile guy. So that really does epitomize sort of just how stark that he didn't know him, right? I mean, this is not like, one of the many that kind of come in and out.
It was not one of 535. It was one of the, one of the people that ran for president against Joe Biden. They stood on a debate stage together in 2019 and actually traded barbs. At the time, Swalwell said to Biden on stage, "It's time to pass the torch." And Biden said, "I'm going to hold on to it for a while." So this is definitely not somebody who was like a random member of Congress. It's somebody he knew well, or at least at one point knew well.
You also brought up, John, his wife, Jill Biden. There's so much. What are people saying that she knew? Was there anybody, in your research who was saying, well, Jill confided this, or, Jill knew this but didn't want to say X? What sort of insight into her?
That's a great question, Rita, and we weren't able to ascertain much about Jill Biden's role in sort of recognizing what was going on with her husband, but obviously she's closer to him than anybody else, and there were other people close to him that recognized that there was a problem. I think, what we reveal in this book is the degree to which the First Lady at the time was pushing Biden to stay in the race, did not want to give up the helicopter, the plane, the house. She was somebody who had not wanted him to run in 2004, way back 20 years ago. But once there was a taste of the White House and that power and that prestige, she was going to be the last person to volunteer to walk out the White House door.
You also had another really powerful sort of example, John, where Biden would put on his makeup, right, for meetings, important meetings or cabinet meetings and Zoom meetings, and would do one and not the other. Describe that story for us.
I mean, it's amazing. So when he traveled, he would get up. The first thing he would do in the morning is get makeup put on him. And the White House was extremely sensitive to the idea that he looked old, because they knew that the public thought that he looked old, and they knew that the term, the idea of his age was really a metaphor for his acuity. It was the polite way of saying that Biden looked out of it, was to talk about his age. And so they did everything they could to cover him up. And so when he traveled, the first thing he did was put on makeup. And look, I'm no stranger to makeup. You're no stranger to makeup. But what was interesting about this to Amy Parnes and I, my co-author and I, was he would put on makeup to meet with the cabinet over Zoom, and or to meet with other officials, White House officials over Zoom. And sometimes he would get the makeup put on. That was the important part, and then not participate in the meetings over Zoom.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This episode is brought to you by Cadillac. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Cadillac Certified Service Fresh Start Tire event. Visit Cadillac.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only. Highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
Wow. Were you surprised sort of how out of it? I mean, we all saw the debate. I've met Joe Biden, by the way, John. I met him when I was in college. So that's how far back. And then when I started Fox in Washington, when I was there as senior correspondent for Fox in Washington, early in my network career, I would see him all the time. So as soon as I saw him, the Joe Biden in maybe 2022, I said, wow, he is declining. Like, to me, there was no doubt. And so when I saw him in the debate, I wasn't that surprised how bad he was. It was sort of what we all sort of visibly saw. What did you feel that way? And were you surprised even some of these behind the scenes really are still stunning?
Oh, I'll say 2 things. Number one, the decline was clear. And like you, I covered Joe Biden when he was on Capitol Hill. And certainly some during the vice presidency, and you couldn't get away from him if you talked to him in a Capitol hallway. The guy was extremely talkative, always very lucid. Not necessarily all of his ideas were the greatest ideas, but he was somebody who not only could carry on a conversation, but you really couldn't get away from him. He wanted to talk to you so much, and now for years he's been sort of. I don't want to say in hiding, but in a cocoon, and much more so than most presidents. I mean, we hear from President Trump several times a day directly, and that was not the case with Biden. I think what was shocking, if not surprising, per se, but certainly shocking, was just the degree that we saw in that debate. And nobody knows if that's the worst it ever was. Presumably, that one moment of that debate was not necessarily the worst it ever is. But here's the leader of the free world, the guy with his finger on the nuclear button, unable to put together coherent thoughts. And I think that's shocking, and I think it's scary. I think it was scary to certainly Republican voters, I think to a lot of swing voters, and even to many Democrats who looked at this and said, wow, this is way too much. And, I think one of the things that voters thought about in doing this book and reporting on Fight, one of the things that voters thought about was, in the end, Joe Biden leaves the race, in large part because he doesn't seem cogent, and stays in the presidency. And if the idea is that he's not well enough to run for president, if doesn't have the mental acuity to run for president, how can he stay in the office that is the most important in the world?
Yeah, it begs the question, too. What would they have done? What would the staff have done? Would they have continued sort of this, I guess, charade if he had won the presidency? What if he didn't have such a visible bad debate? I mean, there's so many questions here, John.
Right. If he had won the election and continued on, it would. I don't think he was going to. Let's put it this way: what we've seen in his decline is not the kind of thing that reverses itself. So you could only imagine that it would get worse over time. it sort of boggles the mind, but it also points to this sort of, a little bit to a systemic issue, which is that all the people that work for the president are there to support the president. And, it takes a lot for them to get to the point, and maybe they never do, where they say my obligation to the country, or even in this case, because of the election, to their party, is stronger than their obligation to the president himself. And so, there was a sort of collective neglect on the part of Democrats.
Yeah, and that is the big question, too. Would they have kind of continued with this, sort of as he declined, just like you said, even more and more? And was there any self-reflection from them saying, gosh, we really should have said something sooner for the good of the country?
There was a lot in our reporting of people saying that something should have been done. The problem was that there was nobody who was willing to do it at the time. And also a lot of the people who were, pretty much everybody wants to point a finger at somebody else. And you can see that in the reporting of this book, that there's, there are people who are, I don't want to say Monday morning quarterbacking, but certainly people who are on the sidelines, and they're pointing at the people on the field and saying, look, I'm kind of on the sidelines. I'm close to the game. I wasn't the person to do it, but other people maybe should have. And Rita, I should say, my co-author and I wrote a book about the 2020 election called Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency. And, we could see the decline in him then. And, when we talked about that book, we talked a lot about, at the time, how he'd lost a lot off his fastball. It was sort of a metaphor that we used for seeing decline that was, certainly age-related for sure, and possibly beyond that. And that was in 2020. Now we're, a couple of years later, and again, this is not the kind of thing that reverses itself.
Wow. And you talk about, 2020. In your book, you also talk about some of the staffers, right? Was it 2022 where they sort of started to see it?
Yeah, it depends. Everybody has their own sort of moment where they think, wow, this he doesn't look quite right. So there were, I think as far back as 2022, there were moments where, he did sort of weird things. There was a Republican governors gave him a folder on immigration, like their immigration plan, and he refused to hand it over to staff. Like the normal thing is for the president to take it, say, maybe look at it, say thank you, hand it over to staff. And he, kind of had a tug of war with his staff. He wouldn't give up this folder. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is when he was talking to members of Congress, trying to sell his economic agenda in 2021 or 2022. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking a little bit on the exact timing of this, but he had brought members of Congress to the White House, and some of them who were there reported to us that he was going off on tangents. Instead of talking about the issue at hand, he started wandering off into memories of being a senator, and they sort of left the White House thinking we were supposed to have a serious meeting about moving his agenda forward, and this guy was, on another planet. So, everybody had their own sort of moment, and a lot of them are described in detail in this book. I hope people will read it, because it's not just about, and I think a lot of people are interested in the juicy details behind the scenes and everything, but it is also about the larger question of this sort of collective decisions by the Democrats to just be quiet about the thing that they saw in front of them. And I think if they continue to keep their heads in the sand, and I think so far they have done that, they will continue to get their butts kicked.
Yeah, obviously. You're right. I agree. There doesn't seem to be sort of a Monday morning self-reflection. What could we do differently? What could we do? What about...
There's no mea culpa.
Yeah, there's no mea culpa. That's a great way to phrase it. John, what about the auto pen, and the pardons? Did you hear anything on that, too? Because everyone's like, okay, there were thousands of people that he pardoned. They used the auto pen. Do we know, was he really using the auto pen?
Yeah, I'm certain that he was using an auto pen, and the only reason that I'm certain about that is the presidents for a long time have actually used auto pens. I think there's a question about, which things they should be using that for. I mean, there are a million things they sign. or that have their signature on them. So, if it's a letter to, sort of a form letter out to a whole group of people, like, the auto pen probably doesn't matter that much. If you're signing pardons, maybe that's the kind of thing that the president himself ought to do. Legislation is the kind of thing that a president ought to sign. I mean, but it is not new to the presidency to use an auto pen.
Do we know if he was aware of the thousands of pardons that he did? Has anyone come forward saying, well, maybe he didn't really know about that 1,000 or this group, because there were so many?
It's such a good question, Rita. And honestly, in order to get this book out to folks in the speed with which we did, by the time Joe Biden was out of office in those closing days, we were really wrapping up the book, which the book basically ends at the election, and then there's just an epilogue about some of the infighting that went on afterward in the Democratic Party, and a little bit about the President Trump getting ready during the transition to take power. So it was not something, we did not look deeply into the pardon issue for this book, just because it was right at the end of our window to finish writing.
Yeah, no, understood. God, there's so many layers too. In your book, one of the things that you do talk about also, John, is about Kamala Harris, sort of the behind the scenes and the wrangling with Obama. Talk about some of the big bombshells on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's this sort of public face of all these people who, say they like each other and they support each other. And the truth is, a lot of them really don't. Barack Obama did not want Joe Biden to run in 2016, and Biden did not. He did not want Biden to run in 2020, and Biden did and won. He did not think Biden was doing a very good job as a candidate in 2024. And what he was most certain of is he didn't think Kamala Harris should be the Democratic nominee to replace Biden. So behind the scenes, Obama was doing a lot of work trying to keep his fingerprints off of it. But we report in this book, Fight, about all the things all the sort of machinations and where he was. And he wanted Biden to get out, and he wanted a mini primary to replace Biden and an open convention. It's almost like Barack Obama was like enjoying time in the writers' room for Veep or West Wing or one of these other TV shows, just concocting this kind of wild scheme where in 3 weeks the Democrats would have like an open fight for their nomination, pass over the vice president, and come up with some, genius team to beat Donald Trump. But this obviously rubbed Kamala Harris the wrong way. One of the things we report on for the first time in this book is actually the day that Biden gets out of the race and he hands off the baton to Kamala Harris. We report on the phone calls between Biden and Harris and between Harris and Obama. And what was fascinating about the Biden phone call with Harris is he said he was going to get out. And she said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "I am." That part's been reported. But what hadn't been reported before this book is the rest of the conversation, where Harris says to Biden, "Are you going to endorse me?" And he says, "You have my support, kid." And she says, "That's not an endorsement." She needed Biden to endorse her because all of the delegates to the convention were pledged to him. The way for her to get the nomination was to get his delegates. And she needed an endorsement, and Biden was kind of holding back. And she said, "Look, if you don't endorse me, people are going to think you have no faith in the vice president, that you made a bad decision when you picked me back in 2020. And I need you to endorse me." And Biden was like, "Well, look, I'm probably going to do it like Wednesday or Thursday." This was on a Sunday. He wanted, and you see the vanity and the ego here, he wanted to get out of the race and then have sort of a little valedictory sprint around the arena and tell everybody how magnanimous he was and how patriotic he was in giving up running for president. We saw him later do that, right? He gave a speech and he said, compared himself to George Washington, giving up power voluntarily, even though it was anything but voluntary. He got pushed hard into it. So he's on the phone with Harris, and she's trying to get him to endorse her faster. And he's like, "Well, maybe Thursday." And she just keeps pushing him. They get off the phone. They get back on the phone. By the way, Biden has to get out, right? Like he's already made the decision, and now he needs to announce it. And they get back on the phone together, and she says, "Well, are you gonna do it?" And he says, all right, his team says, we're going to do two statements today, one where he gets out and then one where he endorses you. And that was still Biden wanting his announcement to breathe, for him to be the center of attention for just 30 more minutes or whatever it was. And it's kind of incredible. And then Harris goes through her whip campaign to get all those delegates. She calls Congress people, calls governors, and she talks to Barack Obama. And she said, she asks if he'll endorse her, and he says he doesn't want to put his thumb on the scale. Already Biden's endorsed her. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton have endorsed her. And Obama is still trying to put together a mini primary and open convention. So much so that he had scheduled calls that day to try to get other prominent Democrats to follow along with him. He had no faith in Kamala Harris. As it turned out, she lost, but he has, always tried to stay out of, if you're doing an investigation of who was around the political body of Joe Biden and the campaign of Kamala Harris, he's been the guy that didn't want fingerprints. And what we found is the fingerprints, and we show it in this book fight.
Yeah, you showed it in a big way. And then, of course, we all remember that call, Jonathan, where it's like, oh, hi, Barack and Michelle, thank you. Talk about how staged that was, clearly, at that moment when that call did come.
It was incredibly staged. And it seemed to be a miscommunication a little bit, right? So, the Obamas, once they missed their window to endorse Harris early on, once basically she locked down all the delegates she needed without him and without Michelle Obama. Then they were like, well, we want to do something that's big and splashy, because they were playing catch up. They were basically trying to make up for the fact that they were trying to kneecap her. So they're like, we want to do something big, and the Biden campaign, which is now the Harris campaign, as it's turning over, the campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, thinks, let's do a video because we can make that viral and we can raise money off of it. And, of course, they had the problem with money at that point. I know Kamala Harris raised a ton of money after she got in, but in the early days, the Democratic donors had choked off the Biden campaign in order to try to get him out. And so they're looking at a sea of red ink, and the campaign manager's like, let's do a viral video. Let's get some grassroots fundraising going. And the Harris, the inner Harris circle is like, we don't understand what's going on here. Like, why is it that we have to do a video? Why doesn't Barack Obama do what everyone else did and just put out an endorsement on Twitter? And, the Obamas wants a big splash, and the campaign manager wants a video. And so they do this, like, really forced video, where she pretends to be surprised that they're calling her. And Michelle Obama is, not on camera, apparently didn't want to go on camera to do it. So you see the video of Kamala Harris getting the phone from Barack and Michelle, getting a phone call from Barack and Michelle Obama, but they're not there. And it's just so choreographed and orchestrated. I mean, surely they raised money off of it, but it also made it, I think, abundantly apparent, like how little regard the Obamas have for Harris.
Jif peanut butter. It's that jiffing good. It doesn't really need advertising. So instead, enjoy the calming sounds of the ocean. Jif. It's that jiffing good. Get your Jif at Jif.com.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Yeah, boy, oh boy. In the end, it looked like also that they still thought that they might win, right? Kamala thought she might win, and you also reported Tim Walz thought they might win, right?
Absolutely, Rita. And I think, one of the sort of running themes of this campaign year was that the Democratic campaign leadership and the Biden White House really gaslit a lot of people, or at least left a lot of people feeling gaslit. And that includes the party's donors. It includes even people on their own campaign. We talked to one campaign aide who was furious, fairly high level, who said, they lied to us the whole time. They gaslit us the whole time, meaning the campaign leadership in the White House. And what happened toward the end was Harris was told by her team that she was poised to win. In fact, her senior advisor, David Plouffe, went on television and said that they were going to win all 7 swing states. And so on election night, and Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate, felt the same way. They knew it was going to be close, but they felt like they were going to win, and they certainly didn't feel like Trump was going to sweep all of the swing states. And so, we take you inside the vice president's residence and fight to watch as she learns that she has lost this race. It's just shock. She just doesn't quite understand what's going on. She asks her aides, is there any chance that there's irregularities in the voting? She decides she's not going to concede until the next day because they want to make sure that all the voting is right. I mean, if this sounds familiar,
yeah, it sure does.
There's a reason. and she ultimately we take you into her quarters at the vice president's residence that night, as she closes her eyes thinking, I won't use the bad word, but thinking what the hell happened here. It turned out she had been gaslit too by the campaign leadership.
Wow. Well, your book is a blockbuster. What you and Amy did is really incredible. Everybody, the book is called Fight: Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. It's an amazing book. I encourage everybody to get it, by an incredible journalist, Jonathan Allen. Really great work that both you and Amy did here on this book. And I encourage everybody, by the way, to subscribe and share this podcast because, boy, was it revealing and interesting. John, so great to have you here, and congrats on another huge, big bestseller, I'm sure. And it's just awesome. It really is awesome. And it's so important for history because we need to know what really happened behind the scenes. It's, the most important position in the world, I believe, to be the leader of the free world, the commander-in-chief of the United States. And we all deserve to know the truth. And you guys did a magnificent and really powerful job. Thank you so much, John.
Rita, thank you so much for letting me share some of it with the audience. I hope everyone will go read the rest of it.
And everybody, I'll be back soon with another great edition of Protecting America. And of course, you can catch me every weeknight, 10 p.m. to midnight on the legendary WABC Radio. This is Rita Cosby, and thanks for all you do to protect America.